are going to be talking about mastering visual communication. So a lot of people think of this as a kind of soft skill. It's not a soft skill, it's what I call a core skill. Okay, so I'm renaming soft skills as core skills because people think I don't need soft skills, I need Kubernetes, I need things to do with Scrum, but I do not need soft skills. You do need soft skills, they are core skills. So I've now renamed them. You can all take that into the world for me. I need you to say, no, they're core skills. Right, so we are going to be focusing on the visual stuff here. And this is from part 1 of the book that I've written, which is called Communication Patterns. And that was published by O'Reilly last year. If you have an O'Reilly subscription, you can read it online. So do that. If you don't, take away one of the bookmarks that you've been given because you can get 30 free days from one of the codes on there. So enjoy that. So, a little quick introduction. I'm Jacqui Read. I am a consultant architect. And so I go into businesses, help them with their software architecture. I also offer training and workshops. So I can go into businesses in person or online. So if you're keen on finding out more about that, check out my website. And then this is your feedback for today. I'm going to give it at the end as well, but I was asked to put it in the beginning because I don't know. Anyway, so what we're going to look at today is effective visual communication. So we could all kind of put boxes and lines on a page, but can we actually get the message over that we want to get over? And I've arranged this into patterns and anti-patterns because in software, we're very used to applying patterns and avoiding anti-patterns. So this is a nice, easy way to show you all of these things in a way that you commonly use. And what we're going to do is we're going to avoid kind of the pitfalls and actually get that message across and deliver that impact that you need to the various stakeholders when you create diagrams and other visuals. Now, the first thing I want to show you is style communicates. So we've got 2 diagrams here. They are exactly the same, apart from the style. Now, if you ever think about it, which one in your head is like the most formal one of these 2? I think we could probably all agree that it's going to be number 2. But what we can do with style is we can use it to visually communicate to people. Because if you have this diagram and you show this sort of style diagram to stakeholders at the beginning of a project, you might get the question, oh great, when do we start testing? But actually you haven't even implemented anything yet. You haven't even done a proof of concept. But if you showed them this sort of style, you might not get that misunderstanding. But then again, show this to your stakeholders towards the end of your project and they're going to go, oh, are we not as far along as I thought we were? Are we still in kind of an idea stage? What's going on? And I call this pattern meta style because it's a bit like metadata. You are giving people subconscious messages by how you actually style your diagram. If it's a quick sketch, people probably aren't going to trust it as much as if it's a more formal style. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to use style actually to our advantage and think about what we want to communicate to people and avoid that miscommunication of giving people the wrong idea. So I know it's after lunch and you're all kind of a bit asleep, but unfortunately this is quite an interactive talk. So which of these styles is correct? This is a data flow diagram. It's kind of a level 2 data flow diagram. We're getting into the details here. So which one do you think you should use? Should you use the sketchy one, number 1? Put your hands up if you think number 1. And put your hands up for number 2. Yeah, people usually say number 2, but I'm going to do the software architecture thing and say it depends. Sorry. You don't get that too much in Agile conference, but you get it all the time at a software architecture conference. So yes, you would probably be using the more formal style of number 2, but maybe your company insists that you have to do it this way. So just do it. Or maybe this is just the initial idea of what you're going to do at this level. We're just starting to explore. So you could use number 1. But that's the first pattern for you. Now we're going to move on to another pattern. And this one I call facing the crowd, also known as know your audience. Now, we all kind of know different audiences need different kind of levels of detail, different types of diagram. But we tend to kind of just forget that, and people just say, oh, create a C4 diagram for this. Create a, whatever the type of diagram is, a sequence diagram. And we kind of think, oh, I've got to do that. But we kind of forget to think about the audience and what the message we're trying to get across. So the first thing you need to kind of think about is, who is your diagram for? And sometimes this is only for developers, quite technical people. Sometimes it's going to be just for business, and sometimes it's going to be a mix. And so you have to be very careful when you're thinking about who is actually going to read this diagram. And I've got a few questions for you to think about. So the first one is, what's their technical understanding? Are they a very technical project manager? Or do they just want to kind of know how the technology that you've chosen meets their needs? You've got to get that kind of balance. People don't really want to know what kind of queue that you've chosen, what particular technology they've used. They just want to know that their needs are going to be met. Then you need to think about what level of detail do they need. Do they want, if you're showing someone some kind of review, are they going to want all the detail, or do they just want like the high level detail and you've already done the technical stuff and the more in-depth stuff with other people? You don't want to give people too much information that they don't want, because then they'll forget the important information that you wanted them to actually remember. Then you need to think about, what do they want from you? And a lot of people do remember this one, but quite often they don't know what they want from you, and so you've got to kind of be the detective and work out what particular people need from you. If you do work out what a particular stakeholder generally needs, make a note of it, because then when you're working on something else, you will probably benefit from going, oh, this particular stakeholder, the product owners normally want this, this, and this. So let's look at that. And then finally, this is the thing that most people forget. What do you want from them? Do you need them to sign off on a decision that's been made, or do you need them to make a decision? You need to make sure you give them that information even if they haven't asked for it. Because if you don't do that, then they can't do what you need them to do. It's like chicken and egg thing. So those are the 4 things to think about. Now, I've got a couple of diagrams. You've got to work again, sorry. Who would this diagram be for? This is a UML diagram. I did say I was going to use that phrase, UML. So it's a class diagram. Who do you think would want a diagram such as this one? Just shout out. Nobody. There's always someone. Yes, it's a UML diagram, nobody wants it. Anyone? Pardon? Yep, data people, because you're probably going to want it. Architects. Yep, so this is probably going to be the more technical people. It's going to be like the developers who might be developing this kind of area. It's going to be like people who might be creating a database schema, this kind of thing. What about this one? This is a C4 context diagram. So this is quite high level. Who do you think would like this kind of diagram? Product manager? Come on, wake up, wake up. Yep. Yeah, I think so. But, pardon? Yes, definitely. So, lots of ideas here. Basically, this diagram is pretty much everyone, because even if you're a developer, you should kind of know this information. If you are a Scrum Master working with a team, you should know this information too. If you are a project manager, you should know this overview. But even if, like I say, developers should see this, people say, oh, but I'm working on this tiny little microservice, which is one of 600 microservices in there. Why should I know that? It's like, well, at some point, your microservice might need to talk to that, and you need to know who's using your system. You just need to have this understanding. So that's for everybody. Now, my first anti-pattern here, this one I call a multi-story diagram, also known as mixing levels of abstraction. Now, this is an interesting one because for anyone here who's ever coded, you probably recognize this as a bit of a sin in coding. And when people code, we kind of split things up into these different levels of abstraction. And maybe at some level we're doing that with distributed services. But if you're using a layered architecture, you might have something like the presentation layer and a business, persistence, and a database, or the other ones up here. But we should also be doing this in our architecture. And we just looked at a C4 diagram just now, which was the context level, which is the highest level. We then have container, component, and code. If you do use C4 model diagrams, you will probably end up just using these top two. And if you haven't heard the C4 model, I recommend going and having a look, because they're quite useful diagrams. You can't use them for everything, but they're useful in your toolkit. We also, when we're looking at frameworks and things, we split things up into these different levels of abstraction. So the SABSA framework is a security architecture framework, and it splits up things into these different levels. And if we get a diagram that mixes these levels, we kind of get some misunderstandings that can occur, because we end up, if I can get this to work, there we go. So this end, the end of this arrow is kind of a different level of abstraction as to the other end. And that means we're not really quite sure what's going on here. So what we would do in the C4 model is that we would split this up into the context diagram. So this is the same one that we saw earlier. And so that's got this software system in the middle. And then we also have this container diagram. And this is showing the same service, but this dotted line around here is that dark blue box from the previous slide. It's labeled the same down there. So we've split it up, and we can now see actually what those arrows connect to. So mixing those levels of abstraction causes confusion. So just like for those who code, we need to be splitting things up into multiple diagrams. And I'll talk more about how to navigate those multiple diagrams a bit later on. Now, this is probably people's favorite anti-pattern most of the time. I call this one explosion of unicorns, also known as too many colors. And for this one, I need to put on some safety device. I get exposed to this all the time. So very often you'll see a diagram like this. Maybe it's not really bright, but it has many, many colors on it. But those colors don't actually have a meaning. Someone's just gone, oh, all of these are different things. I'm going to color them with lots of different colors. But anyone who sees the diagram thinks, what do those colors mean? And that uses up precious brain cycles trying to find these patterns, because that's what human brains do. We look for patterns all the time. And so if you're going to show people something like this, you might as well actually be showing them that. So don't waste people's brain power with things that don't actually have a meaning. Also, don't force them to wear sunglasses to look at your diagrams. So what can we do? I can take those off again so I can actually see you now. We can actually use that color to communicate. We can group it by, say, a type or a function. So in this case, I've reduced down those numbers of colors and I've used them to actually indicate something. Look, I even put a key in. Do that, do use keys and legends. I don't care which one you call it, but do put them in. And so we've reduced down those colors. So that's my first big tip. Minimize your color palette. Even if you've got a key, if you have more than, say, 6 colors in there, people are really going to struggle with going, oh, what's that? Okay, that's that one. What's that? Okay, that's that one. So don't put 17 colours and go, but I put a key. It's fine. Reduce those colours down, split that diagram up if you're going to need to show tiny things like that. But also we want to use that colour to communicate. So make sure it has a meaning. If it doesn't have a meaning, don't use it. Use the same colour for all the bits in your diagram. Make it black and white. We don't really like to use just black and white now. People try to put all these colours in things, but if there's no meaning to it, don't make it fancy. If you do use just black and white in your diagrams and you want to highlight something, you can then just put one colour in, and that completely draws people's attention to that bit that you're highlighting. And that can be really effective, especially if you're trying to present things to people. Right, that's the end of that one. Next, we've got an anti-pattern. This one I call a spider's web. Sorry if people don't like spiders. Also known as unclear relationships. Now, you've probably seen diagrams that are a bit like this, and I bet they were a lot bigger and had a lot more lines and a lot more things kind of crossing over. And a little spider there is very happy in this diagram. So how can we kind of improve this? There's lots of little techniques that you can use. And I'll show you this on the diagram afterwards. But the first thing you can do is just remove the unnecessary information. Don't try and put all the information into one diagram. Think, what am I trying to communicate? If it's not important, like if you have all your little security protocols in there or something, if it's not important, take it out. Okay? So that's the first thing you can do. The next, as I've said before, split those diagrams up. If you're trying to put too much information in one diagram, if it's getting really ridiculously big, split it up. You can remove things like, say, there's a database that all your services are talking to, or one particular service that all of them are talking to. Remove that, put a note in the diagram to say, I've removed it, and create another diagram that has just that service in it. If you actually even need a diagram, just put that service and then put all the services around it that are using it. Or put that information in a table. Does it need to be a diagram? So split them up. Then we're going to minimize the line crossings. So just moving things around can make a really big difference. And I'll show you how that makes a big difference in a minute with this one. And when lines do cross, you want to use a nice big line jump. So you want to use like a nice big arc, really obvious. Don't just use the little default ones that you get, because then they're not obvious. So we're using those. This one is quite a nuanced little thing, but if you can standardize where you put your labels, like say at the beginning of the arrow or in the middle of the arrow, it makes it so much easier for people to easily see which label goes with which line in your diagram. So definitely do that. And then last of all here, we can use angled lines, or what's called orthogonal, if I can say it. This makes the relationship a lot clearer, and I will show you what these are. These are normally a standard setting when you're using various software to draw things. But you can see on this side, I'm using these orthogonal lines. They've got these right angles in them, and it means that you can drag that part of the line and move bits around so that you can adjust where things are in the diagram. It makes it so much easier to make it much more legible. So if we look at the full one, I've actually managed to get it so there's no lines crossing just by moving things around here. I have put the labels generally at the beginning, but there's always an exception, like these two up here. Use my pointer. So this one here, it would have been more crowded at the bottom there, so I've moved that up. This one here is in the middle of the line because putting it up there would have just been a bit silly. But in general, I have put them towards the beginning of the arrow, and it just makes it much easier for people to just scan it and read it. Now, an interesting statement here, diagrams are free. And one of my friends, Neil Ford, likes to say that slides are free when you're making a presentation. So that's basically saying if you make a presentation, more slides is better. Don't cram everything into one slide. And so I say the same things at diagrams. More diagrams is better. Don't shove everything into one big diagram because it's just going to get too confusing. So create more diagrams. Split them up. Right, another anti-pattern here. We're going to talk a little bit more about colour. Now, this is a fun one. This is all about relying on colour to communicate. Now, you've got to wake up again now. Okay? I have simulated protanopia, which is a type of colour blindness here. One of these is yellow. Which one is it? Put your hands up if you think it's A, B, C, and D. In that case, it was D. I've now simulated a different type of colour blindness. This one is tritanopia, and I've moved them around. So, which one of these is yellow? Is it E, F, G, and H? Now, it's always interesting, this one. I get a much wider spread of people with this one, but also there are a lot of people who go, I'm not even going to vote. So in this case, it was E. And you can have a look here. I've lined them up correctly. And so you can see, actually, it's not just don't use red and green, because there are an awful lot of different types of colour blindness. And here they are. So some people who have colour blindness or colour vision deficiency can see the colour partially. Some can't see it at all. There are a very small number of people who cannot see colour at all, which is called chromatopsia or monochromacy. And so we might think, oh, there's only 4.5% of the world's population. I don't really need to worry about that. But it's actually 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women. And if you think about the tech industry at the moment, there's an awful lot more men. So you're actually more likely to run into someone in the tech industry who is colourblind. Now, maybe someday that will change. I hope it will. But at the moment, you are more likely to have someone who's colourblind in your audience, be that an in-person audience or be it in a team or in your company. And it's actually more than 350 million people worldwide. And if you think about that, it's quite a lot. That's more than the entire population of the USA and about half the population of Europe. It's a lot of people. And there's a few things we can do about this. If you are working in the web, if you're creating a UI, there are tools within the browser in the developer settings which you can use that will simulate these different types. And so you can actually look at it yourself. They're not perfect, but they're better than not using it. There are also ones that you can install into your browser, but I know a lot of people can't actually do that on their work laptop, so it is built into things like Chrome and Firefox. You just have to fiddle about in the developer tools to find them. And so if you've got a palette, this one I just pulled out of a picture I quite liked. I kind of pulled out some of the colours. You can then have a look at it with these different simulators. And you can go, okay, there's my palette. But when I look at it, these colours are really similar for some people. And what you're going to do about that? Easiest thing is just take one of those colours out. If you don't need those colours, just remove them. The other thing you can do is you can change the lightness or darkness of that colour, but then you're going to have to do that check again to make sure that it is different from everything else. Now, I've said use a colourblind simulator. You're probably thinking, I do not have time to do all this. If you do one thing with these simulators, have a look at it in monochrome, because if you can't tell the difference in monochrome, somebody is going to have a problem with it. So that's the big thing. Do that check first. Nice and simple. The other thing we think is that when we use a tool like Visio, if you use Visio, I'm sorry, I tend to use Draw.io, which is free. You can use it in the browser. It's really useful if you're running workshops and things. If we use some standard colours from Draw.io, you'd think, oh, they must have thought about this. Nope, no, they didn't. If you simulate it, oh, I now can't tell the difference between those colours. So if we have our colour deficiency friendly palette, we can do a check there. And yes, they look very different to our original colours, but they also look very different from each other. So if you're looking at a key, someone will be able to tell the difference. Do not trust that your corporate palette has had this thought put into it, because they usually haven't, even in this day and age. So you probably want to check your corporate palette if you're using that in your diagrams. So we want to be thinking about that. Whatever software you're using, you cannot trust it. So the big message here is don't rely on colour alone. So if you can't do this, or you're thinking about, okay, I'm not just using colour. Come on. Look, I've put a key in here. This is fine until we see it in grayscale. So as I said, this is the biggest litmus test for whether colours work. So one of the other things you can do, apart from actually fiddling with the colours, is to use pattern. Now, all you need to do here is make sure that this contrast is good, big enough for people to be able to see that, especially if people don't have like full sight. You can also use symbols. I've been using these throughout. I haven't used any colour to differentiate between patterns and anti-patterns. I've just used the ticks and the crosses to show the difference between them. So here we have a few things. We can use patterns, we can use symbols, we can use labels. Labelling things in your diagram or in a graph works as well. Along with the colour, you can throw the colour out if you want to. We can choose the colours with the different saturation levels, as I said before. We can use that simulation tool. We can consider monitor and projector colour calibration. So this projector, you're actually seeing different colours up there to what I'm seeing on there. So when I share these slides afterwards, you'll be able to see the difference. But when you actually make sure that the colours are can be differentiated, that will mean even if they look different on a screen, just like today, they will still look actually different. Now, I had, it's interesting, at another conference I did this talk at, they actually had two different projectors because it was quite a big room, and the colours were different on the two different projectors. So it just illustrated that point really nicely. We then can look at the grayscale. That's your big litmus test. Right, another pattern now. This one I call written in legend. Basically using a key or a legend, as I was saying before. So don't rely on your audience having specific knowledge. You may think, oh yes, all my developers know about this technology, but they may not. You may think, oh, everybody knows what these letters, this abbreviation stands for. No, they don't. They all think it stands for something different. So don't rely on your audience having specific knowledge. We can use a key and legend to make sure that people understand. But this is going to be a big balancing act, because you're going to have some people who are going, oh, I know this. Why are you going on about this? And we can think about this as kind of these ramps and steps. So we want to provide this ramp for the people who need it to get up to speed. But if you can say, oh, just use the steps if you want to, you can skip this bit. It kind of gives that balance. And so you're not annoying some people and teaching them to suck eggs, whatever that phrase actually really means. I don't know why you would want to do that. But you are kind of getting that balance, giving people the information they need without boring them. And so even if you've got a diagram such as this one, this is a domain story. If you have not seen domain storytelling, I can recommend going and have a look at that. Really, really useful collaborative tool. But you might think, oh, I've chosen these icons, people know what they mean. Don't assume that people will see the same thing in that symbol as you do, especially if people are from different cultures or like different ages, things like that. People will see things differently. So include a key, tell people what things mean. These numbers, you might think, oh, it's all obvious that that's the order. But some people might think, oh, it's priority. You never know. So tell people what these things actually mean. What we were trying to do is not leave things open to interpretation, because you do not want to give a diagram to a group of people and for, like, say you've got a diagram and several teams are going to be working on it. You do not want one team interpreting it in one way and another team interpreting it another way, because they come back and things do not work. So back to UML again. Everybody loves UML. Everyone understands UML, don't they? No, they don't. They never did. So we want to be including a key. But I've also told you to try not to clutter up your diagram. We don't want to kind of annoy people. There's a couple of things you can do here. You can either just include the little bit that you need. So this bit here is the only bit you really need to include there. You can also, if you're creating a wiki or a web page of some sort, you can hide things. That might open in a new tab. It might kind of just show the diagram for people and they can open and close it, show the key. So there's different ways that you can help people to understand. Even C4, this is supposed to be really easy to understand. Anyone should be able to read this diagram because it's quite simple. It's got all the information you need on it, but Simon Brown, who created the model, said use a key. Always use a key. Even if, like, maybe you've got 6 diagrams on the page, put the key just once on the page if that's what you want to do. But give people that information so that they don't misinterpret what you're saying. It can be really, really expensive if people don't understand what you've put into your diagram. So what we're doing here is that we're limiting our assumptions of what people will think of our diagram. And we want to limit people's assumptions all the way through when we're creating software. So when you're at the sort of gathering requirements and things like that, you are going to be writing down any assumptions that you and your team are making, and you need to go back to stakeholders and say, right, we've assumed this, this, and this. We need you to sign off on them. So you're doing that already in your your software, your project management. You want to make sure that you are limiting your assumptions of what people think when you are creating your diagrams as well. Now, sorry, you're going to have to think about this anti-pattern. Thinking hats on. So this is multiple letter acronym HELP, or MLAH. Big thing here, if you take nothing else away from today, only use defined acronyms. Will make everybody's life so much easier. So when you are speaking, you should be really thinking about, I need to use the acronym. So throughout this, I've been using AKA, also known as. And so if you say both of those things, people get the opportunity to learn and put them together. And so next time they hear either the acronym or the long version, they will understand it. But if you don't give people that opportunity to learn and put them together by saying them together, then they won't understand either one. You can also, when you're writing things, define them together. So depending on how long your piece of writing is, if you're writing a blog post or something fairly short, you can just define it once towards the first time you use it. If you're writing something a lot bigger, maybe it's your knowledge base, maybe you're writing some kind of white paper presentation, you might need to define it more than once, or put it in something like a glossary. If it's in a diagram, put it in the key. If you're trying to save space in your diagram, make sure it's still in the key somewhere. So, thinking hats on. What does DRY stand for? Shout it out, I can't hear. Don't repeat yourself. Very good. Right. What does DFD stand for? Data flow diagram, well done. We saw some earlier. SPA. Yep, single page application. And BLT. Yes, bacon, lettuce, and tomato. Or is it business leadership team, basic language translator, bulk loading tool? Be like that. You get my point. People could be reading different things into an acronym, even if it's something like, yes, that's obvious, it's definitely bacon, lettuce, and tomato. It's not obvious. People can even be from, you could come from the same community, go to the same schools, and still think that these things are different, have different meanings. It's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that other people have the same ideas as you because you've got really good ideas in your own head. Well, I hope you do anyway, or at least think they're good. You have this understanding, and yet we kind of forget that other people haven't had the same life experiences as us, because even if you've got an identical twin, they haven't had the same life experiences as you. And so we need to remember that one tiny little thing could really, really screw up a project, cost millions of pounds, one tiny little misunderstanding. Very, very easy. So next time you use an acronym, I want you to think SIDI, which stands for state it, define it. No, I am being silly there. I'm not trying to create another acronym, but I did just follow it, so that's all right. Right, another pattern now. This one I call a push in the right direction, also known as, aka, match the diagram flow to expectations. Now, this is quite an interesting one, because all diagrams have some kind of flow of information in them, be they a behavioural diagram or a structural diagram. And so when a diagram like this one is created without thinking about how someone's going to read it, it becomes really difficult to even work out where to start looking at this diagram. Have you worked out where this diagram starts from yet? It's down here in the bottom right, of course. So when we're looking at a diagram in English, English goes left to right, top to bottom. So what we can do is we can create that diagram so that people will be able to easily read it. So now we've got the start over here. There we go. So the customer's there. We've got requests going left to right, and we've got the responses going right to left. And because I'm following that pattern throughout, it's really easy for people to see how to read the diagram. It's also made much nicer because it fits onto the slide as well. So that's another thing that I talk about in the book, is thinking, where is this going to be shown? How many people have printed off a diagram on an A4 sheet of paper in the last 5 years? 2 people. Whoa, that's amazing. In the last year? Whoa. Anyway, 1. So we don't put diagrams on paper anymore. We look at diagrams on screen, which is the other way around. So think about that when you're creating your diagrams. How are people going to view them? When you're using something like a sequence diagram, these are much easier to get right, because as long as you get whatever these items are at the top, services, day store, whatever they are, if you get them in the right order, you can get a nice flow in there. If these were in a different order, this would go all over the place, probably cross over other lines. So just think about how you're going to order them, get that nice flow. We've got that left to right, right to left, really easy for people to understand. So the big thing here is that you're going to consider how someone's going to read your diagram. Now, when you're creating the diagram, you've created it, you know where it starts from. Try showing it to someone else. So where does this diagram start? If it takes them more than about 5 seconds to work that out, you probably need to rejig it a bit. If you have a diagram that someone else created, or you don't have the original and you're thinking, I don't have time to recreate this diagram, you can use some other things in there. You can have like a big sort of "you are here" sort of hand like you have on a map. You can use numbering. If stuff jumps all over the place, just put a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like that, so people can actually use it. So even if you can't edit the diagram, you can do something to help people read it. Right, another pattern. Show them the pirate ship, also known as enthrall your audience with the context. Now this is actually named after a chapter in Gregor Hoppe's book, The Software Architect Elevator. So anyone who is involved in software architecture, I recommend having a look at that, another good book. But he likes to talk about these as Lego, or as he calls them, Legos. I think they do that in America. And so he says, when you look at the cover of a box of Legos, you don't see a picture of the individual bricks inside. Instead, you see a picture of an exciting, fully assembled model positioned in a lifelike pirate's bay with cliffs and sharks. Now, we're not creating diagrams for children. At least some of you might think you're creating diagrams for children, but we're not in general. But this still can help us. So when we're thinking, right, this is what we want to talk about in this meeting. So let's just jump in there and start here. We're at the second level of data flow diagram. We want to talk about this flow here. But what we really need to do is we need to start from the beginning. We need to make sure that people understand where we're going. And then we can jump into where we need to talk about. And so we can order our diagrams as we look at them like this. But really, that's not the beginning. Remember I talked about the context being at the highest level? Maybe we need to start from the context. Maybe we need to go into more detail and go through this. And when you're talking to one group of people, you might need to spend a lot of time at this level and this level because they're new to this project. Other people, you might go, okay, yes, we talk about this, then you go straight to the next bit, and how long you spend at each level will vary depending on who you're talking to. But don't make the mistake of starting too late in the story, because if people don't understand something, you're going to get lots of questions or you're going to get misunderstandings. So one thing you can do is have a look at all of your diagrams and documentation and kind of put them in order and see if you've got any narrative gaps in there which you can fill so that you don't get those misunderstandings or really annoying questions that you can't answer easily without producing a diagram. So there's a little bit of homework for you. Sorry. Right. We are going to go for one more. There we go. So this one is a pattern which I call strike a balance. And this is a nice kind of little icing on the cake one. Now humans actually really quite like balance and symmetry. There's a good quote here by, I'm not going to try and pronounce her name, I'll just get it wrong. But balance is an innate, fundamental human expectation. So if you can give somebody something balanced, they're going to like it more. And if you're trying to convince someone of something, then you want them to like what you're showing them. So this is perfectly fine C4 diagram. There's nothing wrong with it. It's easy to understand. But what about if we just jig it around and balance it? Now, I don't know if it's because it looks a little bit more like a Space Invader, that people like it more. I think it's just because it's balanced. And I've even managed to make it nice and balanced with the database shapes as well. It doesn't have to be, but if just the general balance is better. But do not sacrifice the clarity balancing it. That clarity is more important than balance, but you can use balance to enhance the clarity once you've got things nice and clear. Make people a little bit more happy. Now, as I said, these are just a few of the patterns and anti-patterns which are in part 1 of my book. You can all access that now if you want, but check out the book website, which is also on the bookmark that you've got, because there's a few freebies on there, and it shows you all the diagrams that are in the book as well. So, told you I would put this up again. I really do appreciate feedback because it does help me improve, and I'm sure it's all going to get passed on to me as well. So that would be really useful. And so I'll say thank you for coming and exploring a core skill, because these adjacent topics really are useful to you, and you have made that decision to look at these adjacent topics. So thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, even if we don't have time, come and find me. So thank you.